day. And I know for any of the other old school internet nerds who are watching right now, I think you might be familiar with them. We met when we had a chance to work together through Chameleon Collective, our consulting firm. And then recently, I also joined as an investor in his company, The Room, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about today. All that being said, I have to be honest in saying Danny is one of the more eccentric people I think I've ever met. Simultaneously, he is also one of the kindest hearted people I've ever met. And so when we talked about what we wanted to address on our ship today, he said, let's talk about the ethics of marketing. And I think in today's world, that's an incredibly polarized world where everything seems to be a fight lately. And I'm sure the thoughts of a lot of people watching right now, we all wish it wasn't. I think having a friendly and healthy debate around the rights and wrongs and not so clear areas of what is happening in the marketing world is a worthy conversation for Oh Ship. And with that, here we go. Danny, I'd love to welcome you to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
It's good to be here, my man.
You're looking rather cool. What are you hanging out in LA right now? I like the backdrop. I think you're going to make some people jealous.
Yeah, it is fortunately not virtual. More so because my computer apparently can't support virtual background, so I had to go buy this house.
Yeah. So say, well, if you had to make one sacrifice for the other, it seems good. I mean, those some seriously blue skies back there. I'm surprised you want to give away your location in case you get too many new fans from being part of our ship today. So be careful. One of the things that inspired us to try and actually, you know what, Danny? Tell some of the people who don't know you, give a little bit about your background, especially around the media world, because I think it provides some context of why I think you have an interesting point of view on this subject.
Cool. All right. So yeah, I've been in this space probably longer than I'm willing to admit at this point. Going back, my career really began in video. It's funny because I still remember the early days where I was always telling people, what broadband penetration is at 5% at this point, and everything else, and the days where it would take 20 minutes to watch a 2-minute video because of buffering. But long and short is I'm a Chicago native who ran away from the practice of law. So I went to law school took the LSAT knowing I wasn't going to practice law. It was just sort of in the family DNA. After law school.
Handy for bachelor parties and things like that, though. So I'm sure that made you very popular.
100%. And I did the most important thing after law school of my career, maybe, which everyone thought I was crazy, which, in between Illinois and California bar exams, went and traveled for 6 months at a time. And those are my career highlights. But ultimately, moved to LA in '98 thought I wanted a career in entertainment, realized very quickly that at least I didn't want to be in any type of representation, but had the privilege of working for Michael Ovitz, who started CAA at an artist management group, and learned an incredible amount there just about how Hollywood works, about content. He was really an innovator in distribution. But through a lot of spaghetti, ended up at a digital rights management technology company called View that allowed you to prep content online, but really kept moving more and more into video and into production. My biggest sort of, I don't know if it's claim to fame or one of my favorite sort of career highlights was early on, we built a company called iFilm, which was one of the first short form video properties.
I remember it came out. Really cool.
Yeah, almost a precursor to YouTube. We sold it to Viacom, which did what normally big companies do when they buy companies like that, made it fail to exist within 2 years, but ultimately built a variety of companies from video ad networks, distribution like Broadband Enterprise or BBE, digital broadcasting group, went deeper into production, a company called Believe Entertainment Group. But ultimately, I'm just one of those painful serial entrepreneurs who just ultimately, even I'm thinking about when we sold iFilm to Viacom, I was there pretty much 1 year to the day to realize that I was unemployable by large corporations, and in turn just had to figure my own shit out.
Yeah. Guess that's why we like hanging out so much.
Yeah, but shoot.
So when you look at kind of all that background, you're now you've got The Room, which is, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is like a event where basically it's small gatherings, very 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 senior leaders who kind of come together around almost like a dinner, a room kind of event to discuss really important subjects, but in a really confidential, private space where nothing's off limits and everyone agrees it doesn't get repeated. So I'm sure you're getting exposed to a lot of conversations around, what's happening in the marketing world from a very senior perspective. And I can't help but get this feeling that you have a little bit of a funny taste in your mouth for, where we are today in terms of people doing it either right or wrong, ethically in the marketing world. I'd love to get your kind of general point of view on this.
Yeah, it's funny because kind of looking at it ethically, I mean, The Room is honestly the favorite business that I've ever had, favorite sort of career thing I've ever done, because frankly, I get the privilege of sitting in a confidential table, hopefully eventually back in person soon enough. But in the meantime, we've done 35 or so virtual rooms since March. But ultimately, I get to sit with 8 to 10 brilliant marketers and get to ask them all the questions that I want to know and interview them, and hearing broad perspective and a lot of interesting stuff. But what continues to come more and more to the forefront is, no matter what the conversation we're having, I don't care if we're talking about programmatic advertising, I don't care if we're talking about content development, ultimately the events of the world today continue to permeate those conversations. And we're talking about ethics and responsibility and everything else. But one thing that continues to come into my mind with all of this is that there's a lot of public things that brands do and statements that they make, but it doesn't necessarily match their behind the scenes action of where they're really pouring their dollars into. And it brings up a lot of different things. One, it brings up, what they're doing out in the open, where their statements are, and what if consumers really knew what were going on behind the scenes, how they would react to that. But even on kind of a philosophical level, what is the moral responsibility of a brand that is a compilation of people? It's ultimately just a company, and a company is just a group of people that has earnings reports, and ultimately they're beholden not to a moral responsibility, but they're measured upon dollars and cents, sales, profits, Wall Street, private investment, whatever else that is. But on the other hand, consumers are measuring them in different ways. And we're talking about a world of a more and more informed or even activist consumer, and what that looks like and how a brand has to cater to that while being beholden to earnings at the end of the day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a really tricky place we're in right now. Stranger thing than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I'm guessing the same applies for everyone else. But it just seems like everything has become so political. Everything seems so partisan. I think even things that shouldn't be political in any way, shape, or form seem to get dragged into these kinds of things. You get some brands where they want to just say, "Hey, I'm going to try and stay out of the fray as much as I can and be totally neutral." And then you've got other people that kind of want to lean into one side of it, and that's the brand side of it. And then you've got consumers on the other side with this, whatever that trend they call cancel culture or whatever. And it's I don't know, it's just a tricky place to be in. I mean, I'd love to get your take on kind of either side of that.
But it's one of the interesting things is you look at and this is a healthy debate that happens in the room all the time of not just what the brand's moral and social responsibility are, but in turn, what types of brands have the, whether you can call it a luxury or even necessity to take a position. There's sort of an inverse relationship between the size of a brand and in turn, their ability to take positions, right? You look at Subaru is an interesting brand, right? Subaru to me is, I really want to shit on some of my friends in Marin, the bullshit liberals that, have God knows what size dollars and houses and everything else, but I'm earthy, I drive a Subaru. But Subaru has, as a niche brand, they almost have to take a very legit, by the way, I'm totally cool shitting on Marin. so I'll keep going with that.
I'm gonna make that your part of the show, by the way.
Hopefully my brother-in-law who lives in Marin isn't watching this right now. But who used to have a Subaru, by the way, but I love him. But with that, Subaru being a very niche brand almost has to take a position to own a specific segment and everything else. When you talk about, the larger global brands, the Unilevers, the Coca-Colas, etc., they don't necessarily have that luxury. They need to cater to everybody. So there is a big, I think they're the ones that are actually that much more challenged with it, where, the niche brands that playing to a specific group have the ability and almost even the necessity to establish that niche by associating with a party, by associating with a lifestyle, a theme, a movement, or anything there in between.
Yeah, when you talk about ethics, I think regardless of whatever you believe, part of, to me anyway, what defines ethics is, I guess, an actual believing in what you're saying, and not to put you on the spot. And this is going to be a very unscientific survey poll of two people here, but if you were to put a percentage on it, what percentage of brands do you think actually believe their position, or it's just a business thing for them?
So I'm going to answer that directly. I'm not going to dodge that, but I'm going to caveat it in that, again, all a company is a group of people. So what a brand believes in is defined by different ways. Sometimes it's defined by an overall cultural of an organization, but I talk to plenty of people who don't necessarily jive with the belief system of their larger company. That's a whole other conversation in itself and where things are going. But I think ultimately less than 20%. When it comes to it,
I was gonna say like maybe 50 or 60%. So I would have thought I was gonna be the far more cynical of the two of us.
No, well, here's how I'm measuring it. I'm measuring that by, and it's funny because the people that we have, and I'm having conversations with these brands, are very moral, very ethical people who have very strong positions and ultimately are trying to become agents of change within their own organizations, both from a top-down and a managing up standpoint. But on the flip side of that, here's what I see all the time. I see movements, what we've seen with the BLM movement, and see so many brands take, when I say public or visible actions, making a donation here and there, making a statement, pulling something, or even there's even kind of public statements, what we saw with Facebook, in July, where over 1,000 brands joined, the Stop Hate for Profit movement. But that was still just it was a public statement. What I see is, all right, we're going to donate a couple of $1 million, $10, $20 million, but where are they actually spending their hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in advertising? And that's the thing that blows my mind, that doesn't get the visibility, where you have the situation where consumers, especially again, these informed or activist consumers, are saying, all right, I'm seeing the companies that I support that are publicly supporting this and everything else, but those consumers are 100% blind to where those brands are actually spending their advertising dollars. And that is, and I think if they had if they were witness to that, they would have a very different perception. And it's funny too, because brand safety and in term brand suitability is a huge, huge discussion point. Always has been, but even more so in this politicized world, in this world of civil unrest and injustice and everything else. Yet it's almost like I see brands trying to hide at times. Oh, I don't want to be associated with this content and everything else. But would they be comfortable being audited or being exposed to actually where they're advertising overall? And I think in the majority of cases, they would not. I think if you asked a brand marketer, brand manager, media person, or everything else, would they be comfortable exposing everything of where they're advertising? Not from a competitive standpoint, people know how their playbook.
You took it off the table, basically.
Yeah, but from a perception standpoint, I think they would be extremely frightened.
It's just an inability to have true transparency, because basically people they're not walking their talk.
Yeah, and transparency again is a big discussion right now. More brands wanting to know where they're advertising and the like, but there's no transparency to the consumer. And it's funny, like I look at organizations in the charity world. Charity has become more and more exposed at this time. There's groups like Charity Watch that essentially go and kind of create point systems or everything else, so consumers can actually have visibility into how how for profit or non-profit those charities are. There's nothing that exists like that for consumers at this point to really understand. Watchdog groups of understand where their brands that they support are actually spending billions of dollars.
If all these big brands and that go out there and kind of put their put statements out there, but would they ever be willing to kind of allow themselves to be rated or monitored in some way that really made them authentic about it? And then I think you'd have to get a certain number of big players on board with it who'd have to have the courage to make that jump, and then it becomes the kind of like, well, if you're not on it, you look a bit shifty.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think there's a pressure component, like the Facebook thing. I think the Facebook ban was total bullshit, by the way. And I don't think that the intention of the marketers who boycotted and everything else, I don't think their intention was disingenuous, but it was like, all right, we're going to go off for a little while and then we're going to go right back onto it. There's the addiction to the audience. And again, it's and this is where I struggle with it, is they're not measured against their moral responsibility. They're measured on dollars and cents. That's where the consumer comes into play. The consumer supporting that. And it's interesting too, as I think about it. One of the biggest, and I'm a complete hypocrite on this one, the NFL. I think the NFL is a fucking evil organization. It is. Am I allowed to say that? No, I'm saying evil. No, I'm just kidding. I know, I'm just messing. It's funny because, in all seriousness, I'm a huge Chicago Bears fan. It even comes out. I just heard my Chicago Bears come out. My Chicago accent. But I also think that the NFL is a piece of shit group. And I've asked a lot of marketers about that specifically because marketers are strangely scared of the NFL. It's got an incredibly powerful organization. Mayors are scared of it. Like, you never want to be a mayor of a team that loses city. Now, but I ask marketers all the time, the NFL, the whole history with Colin Kaepernick, not letting their players protest on the sideline, even though it claims to be a private organization, even though it's totally subsidized by the government when it comes down to it with stadiums and all of that other stuff. But you have this situation where the NFL held out longer than anyone and finally started allowing people to protest and the like. But that was they ultimately just had to, but brands never were willing to step up. and go against the NFL. And I've asked some of these marketers about that, and they're like, the audience is too valuable. So ultimately, there's that wall
it's
of
ethics to a point. It sounds like we totally believe this, unless you disagree with it, and you'll take our media exposure away.
yeah, but literally them being afraid of that versus I would have rather, not even rather, but in addition to them banding together to boycott Facebook, I would have loved to have seen them, really band together and say, we're going to stop supporting the NFL. That would force them to change, and in turn, seeing the consumers, push for that.
It's fair. I'm not a fan of the concept of cancel culture or whatever you want to call it. But I also, I just wish we could, figure out a way to, get people to do the right thing where it doesn't, everything seems to come to some form of extreme these days, which is unfortunate. One of the things that I'd love your take on, I think could be really challenging, when it comes to this kind of sincerity that we were talking about earlier, and if sincerity is part of what I think makes your beliefs real, and that's ultimately, I think, what this conversation is about. How do you think brands should deal with, let's say, social media posts supporting, charities or supporting movements? Because I feel like over the last 6 months, I got these impressions from different brands that we know and are in contact with, where it was like, oh, crud, well, we need to do this now because everyone else has done it. And then there would be this tipping point, be like, oh, we can't do it now because now it looked like we didn't mean it. And it's like, and so, you saw, a lot of this kind of, backlash to these kind of things over the last, 3 or 4 months in particular. Any two cents on how brands should think about that? Or
there's the sort of famous statements in media and advertising. No one ever got fired for buying X, right? And ultimately, the people executing this do have to worry about their jobs and everything else and what they're going to be measured against and that risk profile. What I'm always pushing for is two things. One is for people to step up and not be afraid within their own organizations. And this is something I always say to people in the room, is I'm always trying to push them to take that risk, to whether it be stepping up and not being afraid to speak up within their organization or making those more bold moves. Because I look at especially the digital media landscape, right? These are all people who at their heart, especially sort of my cohorts who've been in the industry for a couple of decades now, we're all entrepreneurs in some way or another, right? We were all, as Bill Murray said in Stripes, we were all dumb enough to join the U.S. Army. There's something very, very wrong with us. And all of these people have an entrepreneurial spirit, and sometimes that gets beaten down at times through their careers, having to pay mortgages and everything else. But I'm always trying to reignite that within people, and in turn getting them to expand their risk profile and not looking at being so concerned about consequence. And I say this in the room all the time: if you lose your job because you were willing to take a bold stand in your organization, I'm like, look around this freaking table. I have a bunch of other marketers that'll hire you right here. The room at the end of the day is partially a job fair. So I will personally find you a new job in an environment where you do have that ability to step up and take that risk and everything else. And
I guess be authentic to your own belief systems.
Completely. So going back to kind of your original question about kind of stepping up and supporting the right social platforms and everything else, it's gaining the confidence and not being scared of the consequence of making the right move. And the great thing is, there's so many platforms, there's so many different ways to reach consumers. I don't think the NFL is a must buy anymore. There's so many other avenues to get to those people and reach that audience and everything else, that you can still buy through your heart, but in the right places and still achieve your business objectives. And I think that is not a mutually exclusive proposition. So it's more about just being bold.
Unless you're selling like football equipment or something, then
even if you're selling football equipment, those the NFL consumer, me being one of those, and self-loathing one at that, I still am. There's other places I consume media. If anything, all I'm doing during the NFL, I'm not watching commercials. I'm flipping to the other the mix channel. I sit with my little guy. We watch the game. I flip to the mix channel. I don't watch a freaking commercial during the NFL.
Yeah, it's funny. Going back to kind of what we were talking about with having kind of bold statements. I want to be super clear. I've taken kind of I'm a pretty moderate guy. I like talking to people with lots of different viewpoints. Exactly why I have a show like Ghost Ship, so I can talk to lots of different folks. I do believe I tend to take pretty bold stances on things. So even though I want to say I'm kind of open to all ideas, I believe in drawing a line in the sand. I think the thing that being said, I think what is so challenging about it today is, if anyone who has the point of opinion these days or takes a stance, it seems like the reverse stance is so extreme. And it just inspired me to think about something I heard recently that really left an impression on me. And a statement was people saying, there's a classic oh shit moment there. I'm not sure if my doorbell just came through the mic, but probably. Anyway, the statement was, we kind of grew up being taught not to talk about politics. And when actually what we should have been doing is being taught how to talk about politics. And that reference is specific to politics, but these days it feels like it applies to them or anything. It just feels like no one taught us how to have reasonable discourse. And then some evil bastards gave us social media. So a bunch of untrained people who don't know how to have sensible, meaningful conversations could just scream at each other and go totally insane. Not that I'm bitter or anything. I guess it's just me how I'm feeling leading up to the elections these days.
The training is pretty simple when it comes down to it. So I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. Yeah, no, but it's funny because I love talking politics, and I think the basic foundation of this country is freedom of speech, the idea that you sit, discuss, debate, and most important, listen, and in turn, the best ideas bubble up to the top through that. But the very simple way of looking at it, I had a dear friend who you met who passed away a year ago, who was a great mentor to me and probably the greatest mind I had ever met, Dr. Sean Stevenson. And Sean taught me an incredible amount about empathy, not sympathy, but true empathy, true seeing the other person's side. And the biggest problem, I think, in these conversations is everyone's so caught up in trying to convince the other side. I love having conversations with people who have very different opinions from me, so I can actually listen and learn. I'm not trying to convince them. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to shape my own beliefs. And very oftentimes, my opinions will end up changing because I'll have a conversation with someone, and there's this mentality of somebody believes something else and suddenly they're evil. There's something wrong with them. And I'm gonna go with a very controversial one right now: the right to choose, or the abortion and everything else. Look at that. I understand it's inflammatory and everything else, but just because I personally am a pro-choice person, because I think practically from a societal level, we are better off with people having that opportunity and everything else. But I also understand why somebody can be pro-life. I have 2 children. I've seen ultrasounds and embryos and everything else. So I could see where somebody could say, wow, that's something that is important to me. I see that as life and everything else, versus, oh, how dare you believe that? And it's, I'm allowed to have that perspective just as that other person is allowed to have their perspective on it. And I don't hate them for it, even if their reason or belief system doesn't jive with mine. That's theirs. They're entitled to that belief system.
So taking that very succinct thought, which I couldn't agree with more, should a brand, are brands people, should brands take equally hard, stances? And do we want that from brands? Might even be the real question, right? Like, do people want ethics from brands? Maybe that depends on the demographic and the age group and the generation. But, is this, should brands be the same as people? I think you're arguing for yes at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think yes, but at the same time, I also think that it's at time unfair to boycott a brand just because somebody has a different belief system than you do too. I see a lot of, hypocrisy on that side. Oh, that brand's evil because, oh, God forbid the owner of that company believes something. It's one thing if they're making all their employees do something and everything else, but people are allowed to have their own belief system. Like, if the brand is taking action that you find objectionable, that's a different story. Then go a different direction as a consumer. But God forbid the owner of some company or corporation believes something different than you. How fucking dare he? How I'm going to boycott his product? What the fuck are you doing?
No, brutal. So I got one last thought for you. I want to be conscious of time today. You go way back to the beginning of the conversation. We were talking a little bit about the room. I think you said that you've done over 35 virtual events, replacing these kind of crazy cool dinner parties. First off, congrats on not having to rebrand it from the room to the Zoom. I'm sure that's dealing with you already by now. But how is that even working out? I mean, you find that it's kind of like networking in the age of COVID. You could argue that the room was perfect for this because it's small and intimate. Big conferences, I think, are struggling more than anyone. What's that been like just for you as both a business owner and also just the experience it creates?
So we got lucky as hell in having a platform that translated very well. It's funny because our last live rooms were March 3rd and 5th in Chicago and New York. And then it's funny, we've done, Zynga is one of our clients that we've done a lot of very successful rooms with. And Gab, who runs sales over there, said to us right when COVID went down, let's do this virtual. And we're like, that's a terrible idea. This is never translate and everything else. And fortunately, we actually listened to her versus listened to ourselves. So March 26th, we did our first virtual room, and we didn't really have to tailor the format. It was funny because the basic format is one company comes in as an underwriter. We use the word underwriter versus sponsor very specifically. We don't want it a sales event. We don't want a bunch of people selling. We want it to be a facilitated conversation. So we have 8 to 10 marketers at the table. So when we're doing it at a restaurant, the biggest thing missing from the restaurant standpoint is we get to make people drink for an hour beforehand to loosen them up and be that much more candid. In the virtual one, what we started doing right away was sending people wine beforehand to lubricate them up a little bit. But kicking it off with a toast and creating that same type of casual environment. It's funny because Zoom has actually there's benefits and drawbacks, right? In person, you can get to know each other, but all of a sudden now you're seeing into somebody's living room, you're seeing into their bedroom, you're seeing into their backyard. There is an intimacy that's built off the bat. But we chose to have the same type of conversation right away, which was, let's still listen to people and let's get people talking to each other. That was our biggest concern, that it was going to within Zoom, it was going to feel like, all right, now this person talk, now this person talk, now this person talk. And quite the contrary, we as moderators have had an even easier job. The conversations just sort of take off on their own. We continue to make sure that we're covering the right thing and bringing people back to center. But within a Zoom world, we have found the ability to get people to talk to each other versus it just feeling like a one-on-one call. And one of the best things too, by the way, that has a sort of little byproduct that's worked well for us is when we're doing an event, sometimes we'll do destinations where we're bringing people, for multiple days. But when we're doing a dinner, it's normally within a specific city. So yes, we have, when cities like Chicago, New York, LA, with a lot of different industries.
Boundaries are off, so you can have great people from anywhere, basically.
It allows us with Detroit's a good example, because now I can bring auto into a conversation that also has entertainment, that also has CPG and everything else. And how the biggest lesson that I've seen is what marketers in different verticals can learn from each other and the commonality of challenges they may have, even with verticals that are incredibly different.
So first off, that was wonderful. I want to say I really enjoyed this entire chat. I always love chatting with you, whether we're on or off.
I appreciate being here, man. Once this feed goes off, you and I are still staying on the line for a while. I like this, Freddie.
But I have to say, this is there's a certain level of irony. You talk about a brand taking a stance, no matter what the impact may be, and so I think it's really wonderful that you were able to demonstrate that today by ensuring that the room never ever works with the NFL. So
I'm pretty confident.
He's like, so you called us effing evil. Perfect.
Cut to Sunday morning when I'm trying to get the NFL channels on DirecTV and my little guy's devastated.
And I respect that. And I think that you have demonstrated what it looks like to walk your talk. And I think that's awesome. Yeah. So
if I could say one last thing, fuck the NFL.
Perfect.
but praise the Chicago Bears.
Yeah. So for all of you watching or listening right now, whether you're watching us on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, or you're listening to our newly released podcast, I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank Danny for showing up and being, as usual, insightful and entertaining self. If you enjoyed what you watched or what you listened to, please give us a like, share the content. That's how you can best support the show. We're going to keep bringing it to you every week. We've got some great new people coming up on our next upcoming episodes, and I look forward to building an ongoing relationship with you. Thank you for watching Oh Shit.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.